Hello everybody and welcome back to StoryTime with Zimmer. It's been a while, almost a year, but I've been real busy. Life got in the way, you know how it is. But I'm happy to be back in business. I've gotten another story from my childhood that I've been wanting to share for a long time after it recently sparked my memory. The King of Pizza by Sylvester Sanzari and illustrated by John E. Hurst. I read this book when I was in kindergarten, or maybe even first grade, and I had to get a copy, and I want to share it with all of you. So you ready? Alright, let's begin. The King of Pizza. There once was a king who loved to eat, and he could eat more than any man in his kingdom. By special decree, supper was served 2 hours early so that the king would have enough time for extra desserts. Wow. Renowned chefs from the four corners of the world came to his court to prepare their award-winning recipes. There were so many chefs that he never had to eat the same meal twice. Each evening, as the king sat down at his long banquet table, the palace chefs would parade out of the kitchen carrying silver trays over their heads, and their voices would resound throughout the dining hall. Bon appetit, our lord and king. Fine food and drink is what we bring. Rare and secret recipes, rich, delicious specialities. So to your health and to your wealth, bon appetit, long may you eat. And so the king feasted on exotic foods from all the fields and farms of the earth. He might begin with a giant salad of moist green leaves from an enchanted rainforest dressed with yellow yak yogurt. An enormous crock of crocodile tear soup would make him weep with pleasure. More, he shouted after finishing a striped and spotted stew made of wild tiger and leopard. More, he wailed as the chefs brought forth tubfuls of glazed jellyfish in octopus ink sauce garnished with twinkling starfish. Very exotic indeed. Yet no matter how delicious the food tasted, or how much he ate, the king was never satisfied. Each night he lay awake in his giant feather bed, listening to the stomach rumble and grumble. How do my subjects keep from starving when even their king can't get enough to eat? He asked the queen one sleepless night. The queen could think of no proper answer. After all, she had always lived in the palace, surrounded by gardens full of magical fountains and talking birds from the faraway jungles of America. How would she know about life beyond the castle walls? All that night, the king tossed in his bed, biting his pillow and dreaming of more things to eat. He woke very early in the next morning, his mouth stuffed with goose down and his stomach emptier than ever. Suddenly an idea popped into his head with such force that it knocked his crown right off. Quietly, so as not to wake the queen, he put on an old robe and made some tears in it. Then, with the help of his royal pet monkey Guido, he knotted together a bunch of old sheets and tied them to the window jamb. Carefully, he lowered himself into the garden, rubbed some mud on his hands and clothes, and silently stole past the sleeping guards. And so, disguised as a beggar, the king headed down narrow cobblestone lanes towards the city. Soon he found himself walking behind a brightly painted donkey cart laden with fruit and vegetables on its way to the great square that was the marketplace. The sun had not yet risen. It looks like it had already risen here. But already a parade of shoppers pinched and poked its way from stall to pushcart. Vendors shouted prices and enticed customers with songs in praise of their produce. The king laughed to see so much food as he touched and sniffed a carnival of edible delights. There were strings of red and green peppers, wreaths of papery garlic, round loaves of fresh-baked bread, and sweet cakes filled with fruit. Pyramids of oranges and lemons the size of fists stood among crisp forests of broccoli. Alley cats kept watchful eyes over barrels of shiny fish and eels that swam in the early morning light. Baskets bulged with fat eggplants, chubby zucchini, and plump tomatoes. Wine flowed from wooden casks, and large cheeses swung like church bells in the shop windows. It's making my mouth water as much as the feast the ghost of Christmas present was surrounded by in the Christmas Carol. The king inhaled all the exciting aromas that floated in the breeze. He was glad to see that his subjects had so much good food to choose from. Still, he was disappointed not to find anything unique or delicious enough to satisfy his own enormous appetite. Just then, the king noticed an old woman hunched over a pile of wooden crates. Her long, bony fingers picked carefully through lumps of bruised fruit, limp vegetables, and day-old bread. "Excuse me," said the king, "but why would you want to eat leftovers when there's so much fresh fruit to choose from?" The woman's eyes were deep and full of sorrow, as if she truly knew what it meant to go to sleep hungry. "If I spent what little money I have on fresh fruit, I'd never have enough to eat," she told him. "So I use what everyone else passes by, and I never go hungry. Besides, it tastes just as good. Here," she said, offering him a brown spotted peach. No thank you," said the beggar king, wincing at the sight of the overripe fruit. "If you were really hungry, you'd be more than thankful," the old woman scolded. She lifted the satchel of food onto her thin shoulders and turned her back to the king. "And who said beggars can't be choosing?" he heard her mumble as she went on her way. "But I really am hungry," the king assured himself. I am, he said as he wandered along the crowded docks where fishermen hauled in their catch from the Great Bay. Or in this case must be the Mediterranean Sea. It is Italy. Suddenly he detected a new spicy scent that overpowered all the rest. It trickled into his nostrils and tickled his taste buds. So strong was the aroma that it seemed to lift him off the ground and carry him through the streets of the marketplace until his nose bumped against the door of a small shop. Above the doorway was a sign that read, "Salvatore's Pizzeria," and in smaller letters, "Pizza fit for a king." Pizza, the king said to himself. What is pizza? The rich odor made him dizzy as he stumbled inside, where a crowd of customers stood before a great wood-burning oven. In front of the oven was Salvatore, the handsome young pizza chef. Brushing back his thick, wavy hair, he tied on an apron and began to make a giant pie. First he poured olive oil on a lump of dough and squished it with his fingers until it became smooth and slippery. Next he punched the dough with a strong fist and spread it with his knuckles into a flat wheel. Then, twirling the doughy wheel on his fingertips, he flung it up in the air and caught it on the palm of his hands. He decorated the pie with thick red sauce, a fistful of oregano, and tiny half-moons of cheese, and with a long wooden paddle, slipped it into the oven. "Bravo! Bravo!" the king applauded. He was so hungry that he could hardly keep his tongue in his mouth. "I'll take that one," he ordered. Salvatore looked him over from head to toe. "Do you have any money?" he asked quietly. "No, I haven't," replied the beggar king, suddenly remembering his disguise. "But if your pizza is truly fit for a king, I will reward you handsomely." "This beggar thinks he's a king!" someone shouted above the laughter of the crowd. "Sure, he's a king, all right," another voice added. "The king of rags." Salvatore's dark eyes flashed. "Stop!" he commanded, silencing his rude customers. "Can't you see this poor fellow is so starved that he doesn't know what he's saying? As we all know, even poor people have to eat." And with that, the kind chef removed the piping hot pie from the oven and placed it carefully in a big flat white box. "Here, my friend," he said, handing it to the beggar king. "At least tonight you won't have to go to bed hungry." The king was overwhelmed by Salvatore's generosity. After all, everyone has to be nice to a king, but not everyone has to be nice to a beggar. Nearly giddy with anticipation, the king clutched the warm box to his chest and hurried from the shop to find a quiet corner where he could enjoy his pizza alone. Halfway down a dark alley, he was startled by the sound of tiny footsteps following close behind him. Frightened, he stopped in his tracks and spun around. "Just some of my small subjects," he said with relief as a pair of field mice scampered across the cobblestones. But before he could reach the sunlit piazza at the end of the alley, he heard footsteps again. "Who goes there?" the king demanded. He peered into the whispering shadows behind him as slowly, one by one, 7 heads covered with curly mops of hair appeared out of the darkness. The tallest of the children stepped forward. "My name is Giancarlo, and these are my brothers and sisters," he said. "We are orphans, and for a slice of pizza, we'll gladly entertain you." At first the king clutched his pie even tighter, but the faces of the children softened his heart. He remembered the old woman in the marketplace and her generous offer to share what little she had with a hungry stranger. He thought of all the food at the palace and wondered how he could be so selfish. "How many of you are there?" he asked. "Only 7, said the smallest of the orphans. "And I make 8, said the king, laughing. Taking a small jeweled knife from his pocket, he divided the pie into 8 equal triangles and passed one to each of the children. And so the 7 orphans and the beggar king sat down to feast on the delicious pizza from Salvatore's pizzeria. As the king inhaled the rich perfume of the pizza sauce, he closed his eyes and saw fields of ripe plum tomatoes and golden Somalia wheat bowing in a soft summer breeze. He tore at the thin golden crust with his teeth and rolled the soft cheese on his tongue. With each swallow, a warm, tingling glow filled him with a satisfaction he had never known. The orphans ate slowly, savoring each bite. When they had finished, Giancarlo called them to attention. "And now," he said, "in honor of our gracious host, we will play the tarantella." "Tarantella?" inquired the beggar king. "Oh yes," piped the smallest of the orphans, whose name was Maria. "For that is the happiest dance in all the world." On a signal from Giancarlo, the children lifted their assortment of handmade instruments, violins, drums, mandolins, and guitars, and began to play the rousing melody of the tarantella. The music hopped and bounced. Notes soared like kites over the balconies and rooftops of the city, calling everyone to join the festive dance. The beggar king did all he could to control himself, but before he knew it, he was up and dancing. God, I wish I could join them right now. He swung his arms in the air and kicked his legs from side to side. People flocked to the piazza, joining hands and skipping to the lively beat. On and on the orphans played, and on the people danced. Before the king knew it,